lesson today that we're going to do is Never So Spoke Man. Brother Don gave me a book to read about the great teacher, Jesus. And I liked some of the subjects and points in it. I was bringing up some information. I thought this was a really good lesson. Hopefully this will help you as well, bring some knowledge and information to you as well in regards to how Jesus taught and how he spoke. John 32, the Pharisees heard the crowd murmuring these things about Jesus, so the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. The Pharisees were a very influential sect of the Jewish society, and they held great power over the people. As you can see in the verse, it said the crowd was murmuring these things about Jesus. They were talking about Jesus. They were talking about the miracles he was doing, the words he was teaching with, the things that he was saying to people, and things of that nature. But they weren't doing it as loudly as they could because the Pharisees had a large hold on the people in regards to their being able to come to the tabernacle and worship. And so they would threaten them. If you're talking about this man, we'll throw you out, and you won't be able to come into the tabernacle and worship, and like you should. And so they did. They held that influential power against the people and against Jesus as well. The temple guards, they took and they sent the temple guards to go and arrest Jesus, is what they did. These were also called the temple officers, temple police as well. I'm going to talk about the reason that this is coming in regards to the story here and kind of give you some back information about the temple guards. They were the security force that guarded the Jerusalem temple. They were basically the police force that did handle all of the things that needed to be done, keep everything in order, watch over everything. So they were similar to our police today. They were likely Levites from the tribe of Levi because that was the assignment to them in the Old Testament. They would have had specific religious duties, including maintaining order in the temple precincts, ensuring that rituals and sacrifices were conducted according to Jewish law. Being the tribe of Levi, they were set apart by God for that religious role. In the Old Testament and when they was in the wilderness, they transported and maintained the tabernacle. They performed music and guarding of the temple. They taught, they did teaching out of the Torah and served as judges as well. So they had to be experts in the law and the experts in what God's law and ruling was. These men would take their responsibilities seriously. They were very concerned about making sure that they followed the law as they should. They protected the sacred places from defilement. They would prevent anyone deemed impure or unworthy from entering the temple grounds as well. This included Gentiles, women in certain conditions, of course, if it was time of the month for them, if they had bleeding issues, things of that nature. They weren't allowed to come in and defile the temple at that time because they were considered unclean at that moment. So they had to be cleared after those times to be able to come back in. Others that had sicknesses or diseases, we hear a lot about the leprosy and any type of scales or problems with your skin conditions, things of that nature. So these men would make sure that these people weren't in those areas that would be considered unclean, and they would make sure that the purity of the temple was maintained and the purity of everything that was involved with the temple and the worship of God in regards to the Mosaic law. These men were chosen for their physical fitness, moral character, devotion to God, and loyalty to the priesthood. They would uphold the law to the limits, to the full extent of what the law said it had to be done and what needed to be done. So they were a physical group. They were able to handle things that needed to be taken care of in regards to the laws being broken. Duties included guarding the gates, patrolling courtyards, protecting temple treasures, and arresting violators of those temple laws. If there was somebody that had violated this, then they would take that person into custody and they would take them in front of the Sanhedrin for trial so they could see what the punishment would need to be and how it needed to be handled or taken care of. These men, being Levites, were very educated in the Mosaic laws and all the traditions handed down by the Sanhedrin. So not only the laws that was given, but all the traditions that was added to the law. They were experts in those. They had to be experts in those if they were able to keep order and keep construct and everything that was going on. These weren't just a bunch of thugs that were hired to be able to bring order to things. They knew what needed to be done. They knew the law. They knew how to handle the law, and they knew the law of the way that they needed to take care of that. So this was specifically designed to be able to keep that order and keep everything in the Mosaic law as it should be. Acts 23, 1 through 5, Paul looked directly at the council and said, "Brothers, I have lived my life with a clear conscience before God to this day." At that, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. These would have been those temple guards or temple police. Then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit there judging me according to the law, and in violation of the law you order me to be struck?" So he knew that by him, he knew the law as well, that he wasn't at that moment, it should have probably been done, because he wasn't found guilty yet. But those standing near him said, "Do you dare insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "I did not realize, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you must not speak evil about a ruler of your people." So these men, even though they were ordered by Ananias to do this, they knew that it was right to do that at that point. Because, as it says, they were not to speak evil about a ruler of their people. They were not allowed to do that. So they knew the law. They knew how the law needed to be taken care of and how it needed to be handled. And they did this. So this is just an example to show you how the temple police were very educated in understanding what their duties were and what the responsibilities were. So they were working well to protect that. At this point, the Sanhedrin was in agreement with each other to have Jesus arrested and put to death. This was very seldom that this ever happened. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they were always arguing amongst themselves about different things in the law, what was right and what wasn't, but they were all in conjunction together with this. They wanted to take Jesus into custody and to put him to death. They were in that agreement to do this. So they had a plan. We don't know how many were sent to go arrest Jesus at this point, at this time, but they believe somewhere probably around 6 or more, mostly would have been done. And if you think about it, they wanted to maintain that order and that sense of control. So as the temple guard or the temple police went there, it wasn't probably just 1 or maybe 2. It was more than 2, or more than at least 2 there whenever we read the verses of what they talked about. But it was probably a larger number to be able to keep that control, to be able to, because most of the time, every time you saw Jesus, there was a large crowd around him. They wanted to be near him. They wanted that miracle. They wanted to see those things. There was always a large crowd around him most of the time, especially when he was in the tabernacle area. They would have chosen, these men would have been chosen by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, by the Sanhedrin, for this specific task. So they would have made sure they were loyal to what they were wanting done. These men knew what their job was and what their duty was to do here. So they understood what their responsibility was, and they would most likely want to hold that responsibility up to the full letter of the law, is what they would do. As they went out, they would have looked at the most opportune time to make the arrest, to prevent that undue chaos, less chance of danger to themselves or to Jesus, because they were told by order to take Jesus into custody and bring him back to the Sanhedrin. So they would have probably been looking at these times of when would be the best time that he would have the least amount of people around him, the least chaos and the least problems of causing injury or something to themselves or Jesus or others there, to be able to take him into that custody. So this did give them time to hear him themselves as well. They would be most likely standing around there watching, looking to see what this man was doing. They would hear his words. They would hear him teaching. They would see the things that he was doing as well. Because this wasn't just an instant walk over and taking. They would probably had some time to be able to figure out when to do this at the best moment. In John 7:45 through 47, then the officers returned to the chief priests and Pharisees, who said to them, why didn't you bring him back with you? The officers replied, no one ever spoke like this man. Then the Pharisees answered, you haven't been deceived too, have you? They said, no one ever spoke like this man. They heard him. They saw what he did. They saw the way he taught. They saw the information that he was giving to the people and the way it was affecting the people, the way it was affecting those Jews there. and was the things that were going on there. And so they said, no one ever spoke like this man. In the Greek text, it is 4 words that the guards spoke. Never so spoke man. Simple 4 words in Greek text. Our text and our different versions have different ways that it says it, and puts it in different versions, of course, for the ages of different groups and years have passed. But the Greek says, never so spoke man. These men said this to that Sanhedrin. They came back without Jesus. They learned quickly, and they understood quickly who this man was. They were learning very quickly that way. We know they were sent to arrest him, not to investigate him, not to interrogate him, or evaluate him, but just to apprehend him. They were given an order, and they would have followed that order to the full extent of the law as they were ordered and told to do. And these men were done, they were handpicked by the Sanhedrin to be able to do this and have it done like it should be. But when these men were seen with him, they were around him, and they saw him spoke. They said, never so spoke man. When we look at these 4 words are very strong. Never means it has never happened before. So means it has happened now. And spoke, he gave a word that was so strong to them, and it impacted them that well. And again, no other man had ever done this. They were unified in their response. Every one of them that was there, however member they all said the same thing as it was written in the scriptures. Never so spoke man. They all in agreement here. There was no difference in their thoughts. I don't know if there was discussion or argument or talk amongst them before it happened, but they came back to the Sanhedrin and they said, never so spoke man. I'm sure more discussion was made in regards to their investigation of the Sanhedrin, or why they didn't do their job that they were supposed to, and what was going to happen to them. But they had a profound verbiage here. And they were confounded and disarmed by his words. They had an order to follow through with, and they were still confounded and disarmed by his words, by his teachings, by the language he spoke with. Brothers and sisters, this is what we need to be striving to do. We need to be striving to try to teach like Jesus does, to speak like Jesus does. His preaching has made a bigger impact on the world than any other person ever before or after. There's many great speakers out there through time. There's many people that have wrote wonderful books and poems and songs and things of that nature. Most people have a hard time quoting every single thing they said. But Jesus' words impacted the world more than any other person. Never so spoke man. When we look at his teachings, they are so wise, it is sometimes a hard teaching, as John 6:60 says. And it is for some. But we have to remember, in Matthew 11:15, he said, he that has ears to hear, let him hear. Those words are simple and easy to follow if we're willing to do it. Again, his teachings would show us so easily and so quickly of how we would need to follow him and be able to do what he said. As we said this morning in Bible class, he said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. A very profound, strong wording and statement. If you truly love me, if you are willing to accept me, you will do what I ask you to do. You will want to do that. If you love someone, you'll bend over backwards to try to be nice to them, to do what they ask for you, everything you possibly can. When you fall in love, when you truly love someone, you'll try to do everything you can to be able to try to do what they ask for you and to be able to please them. This is the same way. This is a higher love, of course. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And so are we in that point or that thought process the best way we can? He's telling us if we're willing to listen, he has those answers we need. We need to listen to him, not listen to the world and the world telling us what we need to do to be successful, to be great, to be grand. The world doesn't tell us things that we need. When they tell us the things that they want and make us think that we have to be so great and so grand and so important, we're striving and constantly trying to get more. We never are satisfied. In Jesus, his words, they satisfy us. They meet our needs if we'll listen, if we'll open our ears and hear. We listen to those words, they will bring that to us. As I said, I did the Psalms 96 and 123, I believe, this morning and everything. And so those words are so powerful in regards to how they bring information to us in our thought process of what God has done for us and what Jesus has done for us that way. We need to remember those words that way. In Matthew 7, 28 and 29, and when it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. The scribes could merely mimic what was written down in the Torah, what was written down in the Mosaic Law. Well, by Moses, we are supposed to do this. By God, he tells us to do this. Jesus had full authority. And by the way he would speak to people, they could recognize that. They recognize that. And in his teachings, we can recognize that if we'll open our ears, if we'll listen. If we truly open our hearts and open our ears and listen that way. In Luke 7, 36 through 50, the woman washed his feet. So we know the woman came into the meeting that Simon the Pharisee had for him, the meal, and she washed his feet. At that point, Jesus recognized the thoughts that Simon had. And so he gave him the story of the man that owed money. They had two different men that owed money. One owed a lot, one owed a small amount. And both were given of their amounts. And he asked Simon, so which one would be more happy that he was forgiven of his debt? And he said, obviously, the man that owed more. He heard the words, he heard the story, but he didn't see it, he didn't actually hear it. His heart wasn't open to the message, and the others that were there was not open to that message. His teaching was brought there for a chance for all to learn, for all to hear and to listen and to understand. Only the woman heard him. She's the only one that heard the message there. If you look at Luke 7:49, and those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Their ears weren't open. They didn't understand the story. And Jesus got rough with Simon. You didn't offer me a kiss of welcoming. You didn't wash my feet. You didn't give me water to even wash my own feet, let alone you washing my feet. Look at what this woman did. She used her hair. How many would you use your own hair to wipe off a person's dirty feet? How many of you would use your tears? Because that was the only thing you had available to you at that time, to clean a person's feet. She sat there, laid there basically, down on the ground, because when they ate, they laid on their sides in front of everyone. And the only one she saw there was Jesus. She didn't care about anybody else. She didn't care about anybody else's thoughts. And every other person there, as we can see in 7:49, they didn't get the message. They didn't receive the words that needed to be given to them. They didn't understand what should have been done. All they were worried about was what he was saying, not what he meant. Not the meaning of the word and the meaning of the truth. His teachings convey a hope that was not present in the world at that time. Pagan worship burned and sacrificed babies to their gods. The Roman rule was with an iron fist. As long as you held by the law, they didn't mess with you much. But if you didn't obey the laws, they would come down on you very harshly and very hard. As we've seen where they destroyed the temple, the Jewish temple. The games of the Colosseums, they were brutal and without any measure of forgiveness for the ones that would be a loss. They would want them to be put to death if they lost in the battle. They didn't care about people at that time. And the Jewish religious elite, they showed no mercy for anyone. If you aren't like us, you're not part of us. We're so much better than everybody else. For the most in the world at that time, there was no real hope except through God. That was the only way. So when Jesus looked across those multitudes, as in Matthew 9:36 and 37, but when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. At this time, this was the Jewish people at this time. This was everyone in the world at this time. They had no shepherd. They had no guidance. The Jewish elite, the Sanhedrin, they didn't pay attention to the ones that needed help. They didn't care about them. They only cared about themselves. Verse 37, then he said to his disciples, the harvest is truly as plentiful, but the laborers are few. Are we the few laborers or the weary and the scattered? Which position are you in at this point? We need to be those laborers. We need to hear the word. We need to understand the word. And we need to understand that gift that's been given to us needs to be given to others. We need to present that to others as well. As a friend of mine, a fellow brother in Christ, said this many times, and I've always get stuck in my head, God leaves nothing to chance. This was the perfect timing for Jesus to come to the world. There was no hope. There was no ability or strength there. There was no stability in their homes and their lives. And he came as that Savior that he needed to be. He came as that sacrificial lamb that he needed to be. And his teachings were so profound, and they still make an impact even today. Are we looking at those people the same way as Jesus did? That the harvest is great? We need to understand and open our ears and open our hearts and understand that well. Well, they've heard the word before. I'm sure they've heard it. That's okay. We don't need to get into it that much. No. We need to get into it more. We need to show that example. As I said this morning, when Moses went up and was around God, when he came back down, his face shone so brightly he would hide it because everybody would stare at him. We should be that people. We should be, when we come out of worship here, we should be looking that way to the world. And so when the world sees us, they're like, why are you like you are? Let me tell you. Let me tell you what's been given to me. I didn't work for it. It's really, I'm not even, should be able to receive this, but it's been given to me. That should be given out. That should be presented. We should be that peculiar people. That people that stand separate and apart from the world. Not to look like the world. Not to be like the world. Not to filter in and mix in so that they don't pay attention to us. We should be the ones that present and be able to speak like Jesus does. Jesus' words bring forth either a sense of hope and awe or anger and threats, because it depends upon how it's been heard. If we're not careful, we can do the same thing. We have to be careful ourselves as the way we do. Matthew 10:34, do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Jesus was telling his followers, his disciples, and everyone that he was unfortunately bringing that sword. It would separate family members. It would separate friends. It would separate people, because the ones that would want to accept Christ, the ones that did, would lash out at them. They would demean them. They would be angered at them. And most of the time, I think for the most part, it's because they feel guilty of not being willing to accept like they should too. It's the biggest reason why most people get lashed at, verbally, emotionally, things of that nature happen. Jesus' words and actions bring forth either a sense of hope and awe or anger and threats again. Matthew 12:22 through 24. Then was brought unto him one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed and said, is this not the son of David? Now when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this fellow does not cast out the demons except by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. So we have two different groups of people here that heard the same thing and saw the same thing. And they looked at it differently. Many of the people were saying, is this not the son of David? Is this not the things that we were looking for? The Pharisees and the Sadducees told us this would be coming. But then they were looking at you going, no, this ain't the man we wanted. This isn't the person that we thought should be. And so they rejected it. Others were trying to accept it, but they rejected it, is what they did. Mark 12, 13 through 17, then they sent him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. When they had come, they said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and care about no one. For you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay? So they started off with trying to deface him, trying to run him down with the way they said it to him. They weren't praising him that he was doing the work that God told him to do. They were just trying to show everybody that he was not the person he should be. So they were not paying him a compliment there. And then they gave him a question that was probably asked many, many times in their own meetings, in their own discussions, in their own arguments. And I'm sure they didn't come up with a good answer, but he did. He came up with the answer that needed to be done. In verse 15, but he, knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it. So they brought it, and he said to them, Whose image and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. And Jesus answered and said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. They could not come up with an answer like this. They were amazed that they could not catch him in something. This is the way we need to present. He didn't get onto them loudly and try to demean them. He just said, Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. What should be given, and what should be done in the right way. John 1, verses 1 and 2 says, In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was fully God. The Word was with God in the beginning. As I was doing this lesson, I thought it was very interesting that John would be the one that would write this statement, and would also write the statement from the guards. Never so spoke man. He recognized who the Word was. He recognized what the Word was. We need to strive to do that as well. We need to strengthen ourselves. We need to dive into those verses. We need to not just read them, but understand the context of where they were, what position they were in whenever this was being said to them. How is it being presented? Who is it being presented to? These are the important points and the things that we need to understand so that we can take this information in like we should. These examples show us the way we should act. Christ was always truthful, but showed compassion. He showed all men that we were to praise God and have no boasting or puffing up. Christ could be chastening, but could offer hope of redemption at the same time. He would tell them they were wrong, but he would give them the understanding of how they should be or where they should be. Very seldom do we ever see Christ just completely and totally condemn someone. There was times it happened when he recognized that their ears would not be open, their eyes would be closed. This is why we see in the Bible where they talk about when Stephen was about to be stoned. They covered their eyes and covered their ears. They were making a physical statement that they would not listen to what he had to say. They would not see what he was doing and the way he was doing that. That was the way they did that. Christ worked to show the people the way. And we merely need to open our ears and hear. We need to pray to the Father to give us that ability to be Christ-like. We need to ask for that ability to understand how to present in the way we should. Bob said this in class, and it's always stuck in my mind now. We want to be right Christians a lot. There's a big difference between being right Christians and being loving Christians. Just wanting to be right does not help send the message out, the word that needs to be sent out. We have to be careful of how we present that word. And our problem is our righteousness can lead to judgment of others and not salvation. If we're not careful, we will be judging people just because we're using it, but we've got the Bible behind us. We've got that ability to be able to do that. That's our justification. That's not loving. That's not kind. That's not open. That's not trying to be able to help someone, maybe in their time of need, and you don't realize the position they're in right now. It's hard for us to forgive and forget what people have done to us, but in looking back at Jesus' teachings, we can see this. Matthew 5:44, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. He told us what we needed to do and the position we needed to be in, just as everybody at that time was against him at the cross. There were so many that were against him at the cross. And he still said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He asked God for that. The apostles learned this. In Colossians 3:13 they wrote, forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, notice there's 4 words here. So also do ye. Just as no man ever spoke. Here's 4 words that are very strong, should be very strong to us in the verses. So also do ye. Romans 12:20. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. If they don't change, if they don't recognize that action that they should be doing, then they are making their own decision. We have to do what is right and appropriate as God told us to do, as Jesus told us to do. And we should learn as well. Never so spoke man. We need to remember this and understand this well. We need to ask God to allow us to be able to speak as best we possibly can, as close to the way Jesus did. We need to be that Christ-like. We need to study and show ourselves approved. We have to study. You can't just listen to my preaching, any other preacher's teachings, and just expect to get everything you need. There's work to be done. As I said earlier, in a garden, every day you have to go out and weed. At least every other day, for sure, to weed out the weeds that you don't want. It's work. But it's work that gives us a fruitful end. We get that bounty that comes from that work. It's what we get. We need to remember that. We need to learn to speak as well as we can, and that way the others can receive that message. Not our opinion, not our thoughts, just the truth, and truth in His Spirit. And not how we feel. It's about how God feels towards all of us. What He did for us is what we have to remember. So in conclusion, do you want to start that journey you need for salvation? We're here to help you. We're here to be able to help you as part of your brothers and sisters in Christ. Do you need help in that journey that you started? Have you strayed away? Have you been stumbling in the course that you're on now? We'll help you. We'll pray with you. We'll work with you. We'll all work together because it helps us in the long run as well. We need to remember this. If there's any needs you have, please come as we stand and sing.